city that you're zooming in from. Okay, we got that. Thank you. And if you want to indicate maybe what CAC grant you are looking at applying to or in the process of applying to, please feel free to include that. So with that, I'll pass it off to Jordan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I see a few people I recognize. My name is Jordan Chesta, and I'm the programs manager for SLO County Arts Council, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, I'm Jackie Atchison. I'm the Executive Director of the Arts Council for Monterey County. And thank you all for being here, and hope we can answer all your questions.
And hello, everyone. I'm Jim Brown. I'm the Executive Director of Arts Council, Santa Cruz County. And yes, welcome to everyone, and thanks for joining us. And thanks to Jennifer for organizing this this collaborative presentation across the Central Coast.
Great, so thank you for that. So what we'll be doing, some of you may have already attended the California Arts Council's webinar that they hosted a couple weeks back for their upcoming grant programs. We're using their slides and we're just doing a regional presentation here. It's a little more intimate. We'll take maybe about 30 minutes just to give a general overview. We'll talk about which grants are open in this first grant cycle A with this March 9th deadline. And then we hope to have about 30 minutes for Q&A at the end. During Q&A, please use the raise hand function so we can see who's lining up for their questions, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. So again, welcome. So California Arts Council is our state arts agency, and every year they run a series of grant programs, and they have announced the first round, which is this grant cycle A of applications that opened up on January 19th and they have a deadline of March 9th. And so that's going to be the focus of today's workshop or webinar. Whoa, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to navigate. There we go. That's not going to work. Oh. Right. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, there will be a second grant cycle B that will be opening up in April 2022. The California Arts Council will actually be reviewing and approving the guidelines for additional grant opportunities in Grant Cycle B at their March 3rd council meeting. So that's coming up in just about 2 weeks or so. So please tune into that if you want to just get a preview of what's coming up. That'll include 11 additional funding opportunities, including some of their Artists in the Schools program, which are kind of under the banner of creative youth development. But for those of you that are involved in arts education programs, this includes Artists in the Schools, exposure, and those. So more information forthcoming. Yeah, come on, you can do it. Okay. This is just a screenshot of the CAC's website. If you go here to their grants tab, you can scroll down or click down. It says current opportunities, I think. And then you'll see a list of the grant applications that are open. And you can click here on view to get more information about these grants, as well as to download a copy of the grant guidelines, which are very important, and we'll talk about that. Here's an example of their arts and cultural organizational general operating relief, which we're kind of referring to as Gen Ops, general operations. So as you see, if you click on that grant, this will open up and you'll find more detailed information about the purpose of the grant and eligibility requirements and so forth. So I'm just going to go over some very general eligibility. And then as we go through each of the current open grants, there might be some specific eligibility requirements that change from grant to grant. So the ones that are open right now, all the applicants must be nonprofit organizations. So they do not, the CAC does not have any. Unmute. Okay, sorry, it was muted there. This is open to nonprofits, units of government, or eligible organizations that use a fiscal sponsor. So I know, in my county, we have a quite large informal arts ecosystem where there's an arts group that does not have a 501c3 nonprofit status. They are eligible to apply if they partner with a fiscal sponsor that would basically submit the application on their behalf. So units in government also include California Native American and indigenous tribal governments. So all activities must be based in California. All applicants, including fiscal sponsors, must be based in California. If an applicant were to use a fiscal sponsor to apply, that fiscal sponsor must also demonstrate at least 2 years of dedicated arts programming. So in most cases, I'll just put that out there, it could be wrong, but like a community foundation would not be an eligible fiscal sponsor because they do not have this 2-year track record of arts programming. In some cases, arts councils like my own or Santa Cruz may provide fiscal sponsorship. That's something that you would need to check with your local arts council and see what kind of services they provide that way. Again, the CAC is an organizational funder with the exception of the Individual Artist Fellowship Program, which will be coming up, as far as we know, in Grant Cycle B. So can you apply to multiple grant programs? Yes, you can. The main thing is that each program or project has to be distinct and eligible for that grant program. So you can't say have, you know, a festival of some kind and apply to the impact project and general ops for that festival. You could apply maybe to the impact project for that festival and to general ops to support your organization, your general operations. You could do that. I'll just use my organization again as an example. We usually are awarded in a normal year, non-COVID year, maybe somewhere between 5 and 6 CAC grants per year for different programs. On top of that, different programs, different projects, you also cannot use state funding to match other state funding. So for those grant programs that require a one-to-one match or a match of some kind, we'll get into that. You can't use one CAC grant to match another CAC grant, if that makes sense. And apologize if I'm moving quickly here, but we'll get into some more details. General budget requirements. If your organization has a total operating revenue of $250,000 or more, CAC funding requests cannot make up more than 50% of your budget. And I'll give you an example. Your budget is based on your last fiscal year. So if I was an organization with a $300,000 budget and I'm applying to multiple CAC grants, I cannot ask for more than $150,000 in funding. So I could apply to Jump Starts for $50,000. I could apply to General Ops. Actually, I couldn't apply to General Ops because that has a funding ceiling. Anyway, you cannot ask for more than 50% of your budget. If you're below $250,000, then you can. If you have a $100,000 budget and you want to apply to Jump Starts for $50,000 and Gen Ops for $25,000, you can do that. Hope that makes sense. And each program has a maximum eligible request amount, meaning you need to pay attention. Each grant program has a grant ceiling that you cannot request more than that maximum amount. Yeah, so cultural pathways and Gen Ops each have maximum organizational budget thresholds. So those two programs specifically are meant to support small budget organizations. And when we get into those grants, you'll hear about the budget size. And again, some programs require match, others don't. And these matches in many cases can be satisfied by in-kind contributions. So maybe the donation of space, like you have access to a venue for free, and in other cases require a cash, a one-on-one cash contribution or some combination thereof. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Jim, who is presenting the first grant.
Thanks, Jennifer. So the Arts and Cultural Organizations General Operating Relief Program, or GenOps for short, is intended to support arts and culture organizations that have experienced economic hardship due to the pandemic. And honestly, what arts organizations haven't? It does this by providing funding to support general operations of eligible organizations. And the general operations includes rent, utilities, salaries, benefits, and can also cover program costs. Applicants can request a maximum of $30,000, and there is a one-to-one match requirement. And again, just to reiterate what Jennifer said, when you list your matching funds requirement, you cannot use other state sources of revenue. Only organizations with budgets under $250,000 are eligible to apply. And note that organizations cannot apply for this grant if they are applying for the regional networks or the Cultural Pathways program. For this grant, and all CAC grants organizations must share their racial equity statement, which describes your commitment to equitable procedures and culture. And I think we're going to talk about that later in the presentation. You can also learn more about the racial equity statement requirement on the CAC website, and I'll post a link in the chat when I'm done speaking. The specific review criteria for this grant includes management and leadership, and that's expressed through your key staff bios, through your budget, and also through the matching funds, which demonstrate that you're able to bring in additional funds to support your organization. This is also the criteria in which they'll be basically determining whether your organization has been financially impacted by the pandemic. The other specific criteria is arts and cultural engagement. These basically, they just want to make sure that the programming that you're producing is culturally relevant and responsive to the communities that you're serving, and that you have outreach strategies that are going to engage those communities. We'll talk about the common review criteria towards later on in the presentation. Those review criteria are equity and accessibility. I think that's it for this grant program, and I will pass it on to Jordan, who's going to talk about Cultural Pathways.
Thanks, Jim. So Cultural Pathways program is a general operating grant, and the purpose of Cultural Pathways is to strengthen the capacity of small, new, and emerging arts organizations that are rooted in communities of color, recent immigrant and refugee communities, and tribal or indigenous groups, and to anchor the cultural and creative work of these organizations into the cultural landscape of the state. The intended program outcomes are authentic and creative voices of all California's diverse communities are celebrated and nurtured. A diversity of artists, organizations, and communities across the state are supported. And administrative, artistic, and governance personnel receive significant professional development necessary to make transformational growth within their organizations. The max grant request for this grant is an amount of $30,000, so $30,000, and successful applicants will also receive 2 years of general operating support and technical, that includes technical assistance and professional development tools, resources, and training. The technical assistance may take the form of convenings, webinars, learning communities, and workshops. And when they say a 2 years of general operating support, that grant activity period goes from July 1st, 2022 until June 30th, 2024. The grant restrictions include, so eligible applicants must be at or below $150,000 for each of the last 2 completed fiscal years, and matching funds are not required. Proposals should strengthen the organizational capacity of small, new, and emerging arts and cultural organizations, as I mentioned. They should advance specific skills and knowledge of key administrative, artistic, and governance personnel, and support the strategic and long-term stability of an organization, and increase access to best practices in nonprofit and public sector management. Competitive applications would support a community of color, recent immigrant community, refugee community, tribal or indigenous group. And I think these are, that's something that we will cover, as Jim said, in the racial equity portion of our presentation. I think that's all I have for cultural pathways.
So I am next. I'm going to talk about the impact grants. There is no maximum budget on the impact project, so you're not limited to $250,000 budget. It is, you can apply for up to $20,000, and the good news is it does not require matching funds. There are several areas that they're looking at for these impact projects. They include cultural and social justice, education, health and wellness, intergenerational learning, race and equity, sustainability, and the environment. And in this application, I do recommend that you preview the application before you start, and please download the guidelines and read them very thoroughly, because there's a lot of great information in them. But they're going to ask you for information on how your project involves community engagement and social impact, how you support a local artist or more than one artist. They're also going to ask for 2 years of your past profit and loss. They call it a budget. It's actually the past, so it's a profit and loss. They'll want a project budget on what you're applying for, the program design and implementation, and how this addresses community needs. And then they'll also ask for a timeline of activities. These applications do take some time to complete, so I really suggest being prepared ahead of time when you go in there. And as everybody said, we will talk further about some of the standards stuff they're asking for racial equity, accessibility, and other requirements. So I think that's all I have on the impact projects. Thank you.
Back to me. The Jump Starts program supports quality arts education and artist in residence programs for system engaged and system impacted youth and young people through the age of 24. Program activities can take place both in or out of school or county operated facilities, as well as state operated facilities. Projects should be tailored to respond to the needs of youth impacted by the justice system. There are 2 different strands of funding for this grants program. One is for programs that operate in state facilities, and the other is for programs that operate in community spaces or at county facilities. Next slide. The grant can provide up to $2,500 for planning or up to $50,000 for a project. You can apply for both planning and project if your planning is taking place in one strand, say for community or county facilities, and the project is taking place in the other strand for state facilities. I know that's a little confusing. It was confusing to me. If you've been previously funded by this program, you are not eligible for a planning grant. There is no matching requirement. Proposed projects must be completed by the end of the grant term, which is the case for all CAC grants. For the community spaces strand of funding, projects must partner with at least either a juvenile hall or a court school, a community school, or a social service agency that serves the priority youth populations. The specific criteria that they're going to be reviewing for this grant are program design and implementation. They want to make sure your program design is clear, that the objectives are meaningful, that the activities that you're going to be engaged in are well-defined and focused on the priority populations, and that your budget is well-defined. The other criteria is community engagement and social impact. And they just want to see that projects demonstrate that a commitment to the community that this grant program is attempting to serve. Back to Jordan for re-entry through the arts.
All right, so re-entry through the arts is a project-based grant specifically designed for returned residents, which is a term that the CAC uses to to define people who have experienced incarceration. And this is a grant that utilizes arts participation as an effective instrument for healing, community integration, and skill building. Successful projects also include the perspective of one or more people affected by incarceration as active participants in the design, planning, and implementation of the project. So they really want to center the individuals who are so-called returned residents in the planning process. The max grant request is up to $50,000 for the grant period, and the grant period is from July 1st, 2022 until June 30th, 2023. For organizations with total operating revenue above $250,000, the sum of requests for CAC grants during the same year of funding cannot exceed 50% of the total operating revenue from the most recently completed fiscal year, and matching grants are not required for this project. There are some specific eligibility criteria. For example, the proposed project must include arts and culture as a central component of a holistic and integrated approach to reentry that also includes other community-based support services, such as mental health services, addiction treatment, housing placement, food security, behavioral health, etc. As I mentioned before, the project must also include the perspective of one or more people affected by incarceration as active participants in the design, planning, and implementation of the project. It must be free of charge for project participants and also should center collaboration. So they ask that the partnering entities are part of a signed letter of agreement. And this could include one arts organization and one social service organization, an arts organization and multiple social service facilities and agencies, a social service facility and agency and multiple artists or art organizations, etc. One more important criteria is that project team members must be compensated and supported by this grant. So they do ask that people are fairly paid and they must show relevant experience and be based in California. So if you are collaborating or if you are inviting collaborators to participate in this grant project, they ask that that is reflected in your budget. Jackie, am I passing off to you? Oh, I believe Jennifer.
Yeah, so those are the main grant programs. Well, I'll just briefly mention that the grant program for the state and local partners, which include the arts councils of Monterey, Santa Cruz, San Benito, and San Luis Obispo, is also open. So as we're presenting this, we're also working on our own applications. State local partners, there's one designated per county. So this is probably not relevant to most of you on the call here, but just wanted to mention that it is open and we're working on those grant applications. And then there's also a new mentorship program for 4 counties in California that currently do not have a state local partner. So the council opened up a new grant program for existing state local partners to mentor organizations or individuals in these new counties so that we can see a state local partner come into being in those counties. So there's a local representative in each of the 58 counties in California. Excuse me. So we're just going to do a very quick overview of just sort of the application process. And then I would like to encourage you to please go ahead and post questions in the chat. We can answer them, as we're doing this last bit here, and we'll also take some of those questions when we get into our Q&A portion. Another quick announcement is if you love these slides, they are available on the CAC's website under, I think, grant resources. So you can find some, there's a tab there that says, additional info, grant resources. Click on that, you can find this exact slide. So the California Arts Council uses this grant portal called Smart Simple. If you haven't used it before, you'll need to register here for the first time. If you're already in it, then you're familiar. You log in every time. And I would say it's pretty user friendly. I'm satisfied with it. As a part, for any of you who are new to grants, there's always some things that you can count on with these type of grant programs. You'll always need sort of your general info. So your organization, your contacts, your mission, basic organizational details. You'll need to have that information too, of course, if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor. What's a bit new or expanded this year is more information and documents as part of your racial equity work and your accessibility work. As part of your submission or your project, you'll need to pay close attention to the right review criteria and make sure that you tailor your narrative to answer those specific questions. So, that, as Jackie mentioned, really download those guidelines, read them closely, and make sure that what you write is tailored to the purpose of the grant and the review criteria, what they will be looking at. You'll need to have the bios of your key personnel. So that's your artistic personnel and your administrative or program personnel. You'll need to make sure you have your budget numbers on handy. I think it's the last 3 fiscal years of your profit and loss, or your budget statement, and as well as support materials. So this includes artistic work samples. They can be videos, images, flyers, promotional materials, and also letters of support if those are required, or sometimes it's optional, and it's a good idea to submit those as well. This certificate of good standing, we just kind of confirmed this. Every organization is required to file a statement of information with the California Department of State. This is something that you do annually, and it's all done online. There's a small, I think like $25 fee. And once you do that, your organization is verified. Yes, this organization is up to date with their information, and you have this certificate of good standing. I don't know, because I haven't been in there yet, if the CAC grant applications require you to upload like a PDF or just more
Yes.
check a box.
No, you have to upload the PDF, the letter.
Okay. So on the California Department of State website, you can download a copy that you are in good standing. And then it sounds like, create a PDF from that, have that on hand. You will need to upload that with your CAC application. And on the last page, there's always just check a box that everything you're stating is true and verified, and you're good to go. Racial equity, I'm just going to mention this very briefly, even though it's very important. Racial equity really is at the heart of the CAC's work. They've tailored their grant programs, their strategic priorities to really, addressing racial inequities and injustice throughout our state. So you'll need to, pay attention to these questions closely. I think all organizations, all applicants will be required to have a racial equity statement. There are various examples. If you don't have one that you can find online, you can also reach out to your local arts council to see how your organization can begin to craft this statement if you don't have that already. That is a really good, starting point. Also thinking about what your organization is doing to further this work. Jim's giving the thumbs up. I know Santa Cruz is doing an excellent job in this field. So I know there are a few questions regarding racial equity in all the grant applications. So I'll just end by saying, to Jackie's point, don't wait to the last minute to apply, because there could be some foundational documents and foundational work that you'll need to make sure your organization has ahead of submitting this grant application. And we'll get to some more detailed questions on this in the Q&A if you like. Same thing with accessibility. So it's really important that with your programs and with your organizations, your facilities, that you are able to demonstrate how your work is accessible to all participants. This has a new meaning now too with the virtual environment. So any kind of virtual programs that you're describing or proposing, that you ensure you have made efforts to ensure that those programs are accessible as well. There is there's a resource on the National Endowment for the Arts website for the inclusion of disability accommodations for arts organizations and arts programs. And I can see if we can find a link to share with you for that. And Jackie and Jim and Jordan might know offhand too. Okay. So this is a snapshot of from the budget field inside the Smart Simple grant application. What's new this year is, for those of you that have applied to CAC grants in the past, they've required us to do a much fuller kind of financial profile with something called data arts. Before that was the cultural data project. That has been actually a really big burden for a lot of organizations. It requires a lot of information, a lot of, it prepares the report in a way that many of us don't prepare our reports. So it's been a bit of creative financial maneuvering as well. It's all accurate, of course, but this year they're simplifying it and just requiring you to report, your revenue and your expenses over the last 3 fiscal years. So this should be fairly straightforward and definitely eases the burden to apply. This here is a snapshot of your project budget. So the first one I showed was your organizational budget. This is going to be a part of your just general information about your organization, about the applicant. This is going to be, this image here is specific to your project. So they've organized it in terms of personnel expenses and operating expenses. Whoops, give me just a second here. Maybe Jim, you can take this over.
Yeah, sure. So this is where you're going to share the information specific to the project you're applying for. I actually don't know if you're applying for the general operating relief, if you're going to have a project budget, but all of the others will. But they've organized it by personnel expenses. So that's the staff that you actually hire, not contractors. Operating and production expenses. So that's your program operations, your supplies, your venue rental, all of those types of things. And then the amount that you're requesting specifically from the CAC. And then of course, there's a space to talk about any additional project costs that don't fit within those other categories.
Thank you, Jim. And I'll just point out that when you're working on this budget, you'll want to make sure that this amount for the personnel costs plus your operating equals your request to the CAC for funding. So there'll be a field up front where you're saying, I'm requesting $20,000 for this project. You'll want to make sure that that matches here as well. You may include additional project costs if you're going to have, matches from other sources. And then you can, if the total project, say, for example, is 40,000, you'll want to include that here. Here's where, when matching funds are required, there'll be this field where you can put in matching funds. You'll have to identify the source, say if it's your county Office of Education or another, partner of some kind. There's an opportunity to detail your in-kind sources, and you want to make sure that, again, this all matches up. So if there's a dollar for dollar match and you're requesting 20,000, you'll want to make sure your matching funds also equal 20,000. So there's no confusion there. So work samples, this is, a time if you're proposing a new project, sometimes this is a bit challenging because you haven't done the work yet. So just as much as you can, show your best work. If you're proposing specific artists, include work samples of their work as best as it relates to the program or project that you're proposing in your application. There's an opportunity to include video links. There's opportunities to upload images, text and audio, and make sure, again, that it speaks to your best work and that it's culturally relevant and so forth.
Can I throw something in there?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that remember that these grants are reviewed and scored by community panelists, not by necessarily professional arts administrators. And video inspires. So if you've got the capacity to provide good video, do that because it can be some of the most compelling work samples that people see.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Jim. And again, those videos, it's great if they're on YouTube. You can just have a link to YouTube or Vimeo or some of these other sites. I'm not sure if you can upload video attachments. They used to have that. So again, if you have a video on your computer, on your phone, put it up on some kind of platform like YouTube. That's really the best way to do it. So grant writing tips. I mean, this is, for us administrators, this is the fun part. Make sure that you take time to do all that foundational stuff, the certificate of information, you have your budget info, you have your racial equity statement, all that stuff takes time, but make sure you have that ready. And when you do have it, you're all set to apply to additional grants. That's the nice part. So, applying to that first grant takes the most time, but after that, it gets a lot easier and moves faster. They're saying here, the budget is an extension of the project. So use those note fields where you can say, okay, you allocated $10,000 for artist fees. How much are they getting paid per hour? That's an opportunity for you to say, we value our artists. We're paying, a good hourly rate or project rate. So use those fields. Make sure that everything matches with the budget.
Can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
One thing the California Arts Council has mentioned is they've emphasized not using jargon in your grant narratives and in your application questions. So strive to be jargon-free and also as authentic as possible. Sometimes with something like the racial equity statement, I think there might be potential for an organization who feel like they need to strive to be something they're not, but the CAC really honors transparency and forthrightness with where you're at in that journey on an organizational level. So be
art organization.
jargon-free.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. And lastly, they have an open call for panelists. So this is all the applications go to the CAC and then they have a call for panelists. They work with they want to work with individuals throughout the state that are representative of the state, the different geographies, the racial, ethnic, cultural backgrounds, to put together these panels to review the applications and rank them. And then these are then, tabulated, and then the recommendations go to council where they're then voted on for funding. So if you haven't served as a panelist, I highly, highly encourage you to apply. It's the best way really to learn about grant writing and how the process works, and it will make you much stronger with your own applications. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we will open it up to Q&A. And I'm not sure if we have any questions already in the chat. If not, then please raise your hand and we will do our best to answer your questions.
There's one, Jennifer, about the matching funds with the in-kind and the cash donation. I believe that California Arts Council used to have a requirement that the in-kind couldn't be more than 50%. Do you know if that's still true? I don't see it in the guidelines.
I think you're right in that it used to be in-kind could be no more than 50%, but that might have changed. But I would say it might be different for different grant programs. So probably read the grant guidelines carefully. And then if it's not clear there, probably reach out to the program specialist who's in charge of that grant program.
And I can say it's not in the general operating relief guidelines nor the Jumpstart guidelines. So it seems like they may have waived that, but if you're uncertain, certainly check with the program staff.
Any more grants here or questions here?
All right, there's a question here in the chat.
It says, are there currently or going to be any grants for no-profit organizations that support LGBTQ? A nonprofit known as the Art and Soul Fair has just started in SLO. I will say that the CAC does strongly encourage grant applications from organizations that are led by, represent, and or serve systemically marginalized communities, which does include the LGBTQIA+ community. And from what I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are no current applications open in this cycle for that population specifically, to serve that population specifically.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. But it seems likely that the impact projects would be a good fit for an LGBTQ plus application. Any of the others that you guys reviewed that might be a good fit?
I think what this sounds to me, the Art and Soul Fair, I think the impact project would be a really great fit. It'd be the most likely fit. I know I've served on the local impact grant panel as a very similar grant that the California Arts Council had a few years back. I served on that grant panel a couple times, and there were many LGBTQ kind of focused art projects that were funded through that grant program. So I think, you know, Jordan's response is correct in that there's the CAC is definitely wanting to reach communities that have historically been underserved and underfunded, and but there's no like distinct grant program for the LGBTQIA+ community.
Great question.
Any other hands?
Don't be shy.
Guess we provided enough information.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have any, you know, really pressing questions,
Again.
so what criteria do they use in choosing panelists? That's a good question. We can answer that. Okay, well, we do have a question here. The criteria for choosing panelists. I'm not really sure how the criteria may change year to year. Usually people apply to a panelist pool, and then I believe those applicants and their short bios are approved actually at a California Arts Council meeting as the grant panelist pool for that season. So everyone's kind of approved. And then I think it might be up to the arts specialists for the individual grant programs to choose which panelists they want for their programs. And for some of the grant programs, like the Impact Project, there are thousands of applications. So they might actually run 3 or 4 separate grant panels where you have, 4 to 6 people reviewing applications 1 through 75, and then you have 76 through 149 or whatever, because it takes that many people to get through to read and rank all those applications. It's also a bit different last year and this year. The CAC historically has done a lot of their grant panels in person up in Sacramento, but of course it's all shifted to virtual work, which on the one hand is great because it really makes it more accessible from folks in more rural communities in California. On the other hand, there is a lot of value in being in that room with the other panelists and really kind of discussing the nuts and bolts of each grant application. So if you're thinking about it, I would just say go apply, and then you can get more details as they come through.
I do know that they prioritize having a diversity of panelists and in panelists. So that includes racial, ethnic, and gender identities, geography, so rural and urban representation, and a diversity in perspectives and knowledge. And the CAC does train panelists on how to rank and review applications.
I see it.
Put the link in the chat.
In the chat, we serve an artist population predominantly white, middle income, and middle age. Is it unlikely that we will receive a general ops grant? Yeah, I mean, the organizations that serve those populations definitely are more challenged in an application process that run by an organization like the CAC. I think the question is, have you been thinking about how to expand your audience? Do you have a racial equity plan? Do you have a racial equity statement? And in terms of how competitive you are, that is harder to say specifically, but I would just make sure that you have all those pieces in place, because that will make you more competitive.
And I'll touch base with that with Charmaine, because I know Charmaine very well. And maybe you're thinking of just the peninsula, because I know you do serve the entire county, and the entire county is 72% BIPOC. So you want to make sure that you have your the correct information, not just for the peninsula, but the whole county. What grants can be focused on?
We're going to make a recording of this video, and we can post it, and you'll be able to hear. We gave a lot of those details early on in the presentation, so you can listen into the recording. Keep an eye on whichever county you're in. Keep an eye on our social media feeds, and we'll be posting the link to this.
Oh, we have a raised hand from Courtney.
Hi, I had a question about the fiscal sponsor. So I was reading the application on the website, and it was saying that the fiscal sponsor needed to be also an arts organization, but that fiscally sponsoring an arts organization makes that count, which would be, they sponsor us, so that are an arts and cultural organization. So I just wanted to make sure I had it totally clear.
Yeah, I think I can answer this. You are based in SLO County, correct?
Yes.
So I'm happy to talk with you about fiscal sponsorship. SLO County Arts is a fiscal sponsor for a handful of organizations throughout the county. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but Jim, Jackie, or Jennifer, I believe if we have a 501c3 designation, we are able to be a fiscal sponsor for an organization that is not a designated 501c3. And so what that would look like is just a letter to support and prove that agreement.
Okay. And then if we already have a fiscal sponsor, because they don't specifically do art, would we need to then pursue the SLO County Arts Council?
Yes, so your fiscal sponsor needs to have a 2-year history of arts programming.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if that's not the case, we should pursue another fiscal sponsor for this application.
Yes.
Okay.
And what I don't know, like for you, Jordan, for example, if you were to serve as a fiscal sponsor, if that would count towards your CAC funding. So no, just shaking his head. No.
No,
Okay.
we've had fiscal sponsors apply for the same grant that we applied for, and it is not they consider it a separate organization in that context.
Great.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And I think Moira has her hand up.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute. I was wondering this 2-year requirement, does it have to be continuous? Our organization, we have like 1.8 full-time equivalents, and we have a boatload of work we do. So holding events, when we have good boards, we have more events. When we have non-present boards, we don't do as many because it's a heavy lift. And I was just wondering if, I mean, we're celebrating our 35th anniversary, so we're not a newbie, but the last event I had was really in 2019, we tried to do one every year, but with the pandemic, we haven't done anything for a good period of time. So is it that we have the ability and I can show proof that we've done events, or does it have to be within the last 2 years?
I think in the application, they just ask, do you have 2 years or more? They don't ask you what 2 years. And
Okay,
you've obviously done it over the 35 years. You have more than 2 years.
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I don't have to get 2 years of new stuff done and then apply.
And I don't think you're alone in having at least reduced programming over the past
Right.
couple of years. So
Sure enough. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat that says, are there restrictions regarding religious programs such as worship art groups, or is 501c3 status or fiscal sponsorship sufficient?
I have not read any restrictions along those lines, but what about my other colleagues here?
I thought I read something, but it's been a while. What they do not fund. Let me see if I can find that anywhere.
Karen, look online and see if we can find something in the fine print.
And it changes.
I think typically, I mean, I'm maybe going out on a limb here. I think typically state funding would not support a real specific religious program per se. That doesn't mean that there might be, an arts group that has religious elements or religious focus, that the group itself would be ineligible to apply. But I'm not sure if you can propose a project or a program with a distinct religious focus or intent. I mean, I could be totally wrong, but I feel like I've read that in the past as well.
Yeah, I mean, Karen's with the Monterey Peninsula Gospel Choir, Community Choir. And I don't think that would be considered a religious organization.
Yeah, it's probably worth
Not
checking in
charged.
with the program specialist for the grant you
I
implement.
can't find anything on that.
I think I found something. I'm going to put the link I found in the chat.
Now, they used to have a document called What We Don't Fund, What We Do Not Fund. but-
That's what I
Usually-
put in the chat, is a what we do not fund document.
Right.
Yeah, and that's helpful too, because there'll be things in that document like they don't fund out-of-state travel. They don't fund fixed assets, like you cannot buy furniture or computers or these kinds of things with state funding. So it is important to look at that document as well, so that, as you're putting together your application and also your budget, that you're not including, line items for, capital improvement projects and things like that. So thank you, Jordan, for uploading that.
It does say projects for religious purposes is one of the things they do not fund.
Yeah.
With
But
religious purposes.
a gospel choir,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's necessarily for religious purposes.
Oh. Sorry, Karen, I thought you were talking about the choir.
Yeah, so I think if something's kind of in the gray zone, definitely reach out to the program specialist at the California Arts Council. So you can, go to the website, click on the grant program, and it'll have the contact, the staff member with their contact information. And it's their job in this period of time to field all these questions. So reach out to them. You might get an auto reply, but usually they will respond within a day or two. Yeah. Other questions?
Moira?
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. So I don't know how to say no. So one of my other passions is the library. And we were just, I just saw emails recently today about creating an artist closet for schools to be able to come to get materials for art projects. And I'm wondering, would the Friends of the Marina Library is 501c3. I mean, our mission is to support the library, but we have a broad view of what our role is, and it's to bring people into the library facility to connect with. So if they come in to watch a movie or to participate in a children's program, it doesn't matter how you get them there. But once they're there, they'll start to see that there's homework centers and other kinds of resources available. So the arts are a really big, push in our area. Jackie's done an amazing job, but would a library group be able to apply for arts grants? I mean, if it's an art project, I'd say yeah.
Yeah, if it's a 501c3 or has a fiscal sponsor and it's putting on an arts program or event, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Same
Thank you.
with our grants. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
But again, you will have to demonstrate that 2-year arts program history. And that'll be really important because I know on the panels, they'll be looking for that evidence that there's a arts focus.
Okay.
Mhm. We have time for one more question if there's something really burning. There was someone in the chat, where can I find the guides? You can go to arts.ca.gov, arts.ca.gov, and you can find everything that we're talking about there under the grants tab.
I put the link in the chat right below the question.
Yeah.
That's even better.
You beat me to it.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you to my fellow state local partners in Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Luis Obispo. And feel free to reach out to us if you have more questions. That's what we're here for. We're happy to help.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good evening.